Okie dokie. Negotiating offers. This is my favorite, guys. It's my favorite because if you like strategy games, this is for you. If you like to be a creative problem solver, this is for you. If you like to see people win, this is for you. Negotiating is not something to be avoided or feared. It's an everyday part of life. Your kids negotiate with you every day if you have kids. Yeah, they do. Okay, the path of a negotiation. There are two options after an offer is presented. So, option one, we talked about it, it's accepted, and then we just go through the closing process. Option two, it's rejected or countered. At this point, we can negotiate. Everything's open for negotiation. And either that negotiation is accepted or rejected. And then if it's accepted, we proceed to the close. And who you're ideally negotiating with. You're negotiating with your clients, and you're also negotiating with the other licensee on the other side. I want to caution you, don't speak on behalf of your clients. Like we had an example earlier, like you're calling to make, hey, do you think your clients would be open to this? You don't know. They may change their mind. They may say, you know what, I don't want this, but give the other licensee an opportunity to present. And then you're like, hey, I have to present all offers to your client. We ultimately are presenting everything because something could have changed. So we're also like negotiating with the other licensee, and it's how well can we work together to find an amicable solution and what's really important to the other client. So common points of negotiation that we see is usually it's price. It's like that's the primary factor. The other one are terms. What's important to the buyer if they're like, the price, I'm really concerned. I really want to keep my payments at a certain amount. How can we solve that problem? If we can't negotiate on price, how can we help them solve their problem about cost? Like, I want to keep my monthly payment at about $2,200 per month, but the house is at this amount, and it puts me a little too high. I want to hear from you guys on Zoom. What could you negotiate to help bring the cost down?
Well, like you had already mentioned, offer to buy down points.
Yep.
So when we bought our house, we asked, we would pay the full price if they paid all the closing costs.
Yep. Great. Absolutely. Why? Because here's something to think about. If it's really important to your client to keep money in their pocket because they're like, man, but we're gonna have to, like, this house is gonna need some upgrades, or the roof looks like it's challenged right now. Be that problem solver, because if they can have all their closing costs covered, they are keeping cash in their pocket. Does that make sense? Versus they're like, well, maybe we can come down on price, and we'll cover all our closing costs. Well, now they've spent their cash. Which one do you want? Is it going to be, and so that's often important. If I'm the listing licensee and I'm seeing that they've come down on price and asked for all these closing costs, I will pick up the phone and say, which one's more important to your buyer? Is it price or having closing costs? Do they want to keep cash in their pocket, or is it a little bit of both? I'll ask questions, because if we're going to counter back, it's like, pick one or the other. Sometimes if everybody's just not sure, I may present 2 counteroffers. I'll write 2 counteroffers. Hey, here's one option, option A, option B. Oh yeah, you could totally write 2 counteroffers. Yep. You can, and which one does the seller want to, or the buyer wants to take? Whichever side you're on, hey, we can either do this or we can do this. Pick one. You know? Terms. It could be financial, time-based, or both. We touched on that. Maybe terms having to do, like we said, closing costs, or another could have to do with they need more time, or they need less time. Maybe the sellers are in a rush. They need to get out of state like yesterday, and they want to sell as quickly as possible and close as quickly as possible. Can your buyers make that happen? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, let's see what we can do. Work with the lender. It's a team effort, guys. So those are some options. Any questions? All right, here we go. The 3 Ps of negotiations. Prepare, present, and position. So preparation is the key to building confidence and ensuring a smooth negotiation process. Present. Move into the negotiation process by presenting the offer. So remember, how are you going to sell the offer? You know, picking up that phone, saying, hey, this is what's really important. Take that extra step to have a conversation with the other licensee and explain, hey, or explain it via email. Sometimes that's good. I choose that sometimes because I don't want to trip over my words. I don't want to be put on the spot and say too much. I don't want them to read my pauses or me having to over explain. Say, this is what the buyer's comfortable with at this time, and then just be quiet. And check your energy. Take a deep breath. If you're like, oh man, they're putting me on the spot. I feel like I have to fill in the space, you know, fill in the silence with my words. How often do we do that when we're uncomfortable with what we think is negotiation because we think they're a better negotiator than us? Whatever that is in your head, get it out. You're just having a conversation with someone and seeing how you can find the win-win. So you're presenting the offer, and then position yourself. Move both parties closer until you have a full agreement. So knowing your goal, know your client, think ahead, set clear expectations, be informed, obey the laws, and know the documents inside out. We really touched on this. So have a clear goal of, you know, reaching a win-win agreement in which both the buyer and seller are satisfied with the outcome of the negotiation. And remind your client of their motivation for moving forward or looking to buy a house. I think something important to also touch on when you have clients that are wanting to maybe try for a lower offer or wanting to negotiate a little harder. Here's a key question I ask them. If you did not get this house, will it break your heart? Like, are you going to regret not getting this house? Or are you totally okay if this deal does not go through? And if they're unattached and they're like, yeah, no, I'm cool. I'm cool with whatever happens. Or they're like, gosh, well, we really like this house and we really want to get it. Well, then you need to soften your negotiations to some degree. Because someone else can always swoop in. So just knowing your market and know the goal of the client. Because if you're negotiating too hard on their behalf and they don't get it, then that's a shame. So just knowing them and their goals. And then thinking ahead, anticipating what the other party intends to get out of the negotiation. Like, how do you think they'll counter? Okay, we'll keep going. So asking purposeful questions provides you with the point you'll negotiate on. Provides insight on where you and your client will have leverage, and sets clear expectations, allowing you to get to know your client and their goal. Helps you to learn what will make a win-win negotiation for both parties. So really understanding the right questions is really, really important to the conversation. Being able to have communication with your client, but not only them, but also the other licensee and what's important to the seller. Helps you gain insight on maybe an omnipresent view of the situation and what would make the win-win. What's really important to them about that? And then just pause and listen. So here's examples of some open versus closed questions. So questions that have unlimited response options. I love open-ended questions. What additional information should I know? What is important about closing in 30 days? How do you feel about that? I like to ask, tell me more. That's a big one. Closed-ended questions will get you a yes, no, or a one-word response. Do you have to sell your home by a specific date? Do you have any other offers? And what's the bottom line price you would consider? Which type of questions do you think is more powerful? Absolutely open-ended, for sure, 100%. Why? Why do you think it's more powerful?
Ask the question.
And what are you gathering by shutting up? Oh, exactly. And you touched on this earlier. Beautiful. You just asked for a copy of the CC&Rs. And then you got a 30-minute conversation and learned so much more. Excellent. So I think super, super important to know when to interject and when to just be quiet and listen. If you could write 2 things and get tattoos of them, it would be these 2 things. What would happen if, and why is this important to you? It helps you anticipate the next steps of the negotiation. So what would happen if, can you guys like finish that sentence for me? How would you finish it? What would happen if you didn't fix the septic system and we lost this buyer and the deal terminated and you had to wait another 30 days, 60 days potentially to sell your home? And then I'm just quiet, waiting. Because that might come from a seller who's like, I am not, I am not going to fix this and I am not going to do that. Okay, well, what would happen if this, and then the deal doesn't go through? Well, that's okay, I'll just sell it to somebody else. Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure that, and I'm steady. I'm not attached to it. Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure that I understand what's important to you. Okay, and why is that important to you? And then you just be quiet and you listen. On a side note, with your hothead clients, if you have one that's very reactive, I am not going to do this. Okay, I hear you loud and clear. I know it sounds very frustrating. Yep, I can understand why this certainly feels frustrating. You know, let's pause here and let's touch base tomorrow. Let me see if we can find some other solutions. Or let's pause here and see if we can find some resolution tomorrow. Why? You've given them time to pause and relax. You let them know that you heard them. And then you can get off the phone because you don't need to come up with excuses and fixes right at the moment. And people can be, this is very stressful, so it'll bring out different sides of people, right? Don't judge. We all have things that stress us at certain points, or it reminds us of something and we can get very, just kind of like looking at them with compassion. Although I'll have to be also, kind of honest, it's usually you want to go into judgment initially and be like, they're a jerk. Yeah, but it also stresses them out, and let's give them a moment. And you'll have people who are very reactive, and will react, and then you can pause and come back and readdress it the next day. Give them time to digest and then come back the next day, and you may get a different answer. Okay? So taking action, instructions. Okay. We're going to skip this for now. Okay, the second part, we talked about preparing. Present, but best practices when presenting, call the other agent, pay attention to nonverbal cues like pauses and voice qualities. So we really touched on this already, and keep quiet once you present the offer. Having a voice conversation like, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm sending over an offer. The buyer is requesting help with closing costs, and they're hoping to keep more money in their pocket. They're first-time home buyers, and there's quite a few costs for them to be able to move into the home. So that is something that's really important to them. And we put in a closing date of whatever, and you just like can present the offer and say, hey, and they're well qualified, and they are ready to wire their earnest money. And so I'll get you a copy of that as soon as possible. Is there anything else that's important to your seller at this time, or anything I need to know at this time? And then you can just be quiet. So really just focusing on that, and then, yeah. We'll keep going. Position, acknowledge and affirm common ground, ask what and how questions, and know what positioning is a process, and also know when to walk away. There are times where there are certain things that are, what would we call it? Like, it's a boundary for your client. Know your client's boundaries. If it's just too much and it's time to walk away, honor that. Because if it puts them in a stretch, especially financially, people can often get very excited about competing in multiple offers, or they can get really excited about their first home. But also remind them, remember to be that steady hand and guide them why they were buying a home and what their boundaries were really. All right. So we're going to talk about some negotiation tips. Always be professional. Keep your goal in mind. Super, super important. Pay attention to your communication and tone with anyone involved in the transaction. This is important. Continually refer to your client's motivation when speaking with them. And don't reveal too much. I think it's super important to listen more than talk. Oftentimes we want to fill in that space. So I keep saying, like, ask questions and then just shut up. And keep your client's motivation close to your chest. We have we have a duty to our clients to definitely keep all their information confidential. And so being mindful on not revealing too much. It's almost like you don't want to show your cards. Super important. Ask more questions more than telling them why this buyer really, really wants the house. And don't be attached to the outcome. Ultimately, if it's meant to be, it will. I mean, it certainly will all work out as it should. And be that steady hand for your client. They really, really need it. Oops, sorry guys. Okay, do you guys have any questions so far? We covered a lot. And then I also want to cover a couple other things. How are you guys doing on Zoom?
Doing good, just taking in all of
Fantastic.
the information.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I know there's a lot going on. And a lot of information to take in. I do want to touch on a couple of other things. And then we have a lender coming in to talk to you guys. Especially like how do buyers get pre-qualified? And just touching on a couple little things here and there. You know, how are buyers getting pre-qualified? Like what are some common questions that buyers have? And so I wanted to touch on that. I also want to talk to you guys about some resources that will give you let me just okay. I just texted Brian to see if he could come sit in for a minute. I want to be able to point you guys towards some resources. We'll be giving you copies of clauses that you can add to the contract. When you're negotiating offers, there's so many ways to negotiate offers, and like it's like peeling an onion. And there have been so many parts of it. Like, I'll use a couple of different examples. Going back to, let me see if I can find here. Going back to this, there's so many things that are negotiable. What happens if the buyer is paying, and I'm going to give you like negotiation tactics here. This is crash course negotiation pieces. You guys ready? I'm giving you all my secrets. Shh, don't tell anybody. I'm giving you all my secrets. So what happens if you have a client that, okay, they don't have enough earnest money for the 1%? What if they have like, let's say they're looking at a $300,000 home, but they can only give $1,000. That's all they can give, guys. Well, as the listing licensee, I want more. I want to see more earnest money. But sometimes sellers are okay with $1,000. So we leave it up to our clients. Sometimes there's promissory notes, you know. Sometimes People can have a gift from a family member and the lender will allow it. But again, sometimes it goes back to maybe it's just okay to have $1,000. But we also want to prep our sellers, if you're representing the seller, that, hey, if this deal goes sideways, you're only going to get $1,000 potentially. But again, also remember, there's so many outs in this contract. How often really does the seller get earnest money? Unless you are protecting your seller and make it non-refundable after the due diligence period, right? What happens if the buyer does not have, they had just enough, let's say they put $3,000 down for a $300,000 home, but they don't have enough money to, because listen to all of the out-of-pocket expenses. Okay, they put $3,000 down for earnest money. The other out-of-pocket expenses that could be expected is the home inspection, which is typically like between $500 to $600, depending on if they want additional testing. What if additional testing is testing for any mold? Or what if they're doing additional water testing? Or what if they're doing radon testing? And so that'll build up the cost. But let's say, here's the typical out-of-pocket expenses: earnest money, which will typically be applied towards their down payment. They have their home inspection cost. They may have to pay for the appraisal, right? Appraisals now are about $1,000. When I started, it was $750 for an appraisal, and they've gone up. So now it's at least $1,000 for an appraisal. And the way things are getting negotiated, if it's a hot market, they want the buyer to pay for it, period, without getting reimbursed. So there we have those expenses. What happens? And then there may be an additional cost for a reinspection. What if repairs are done? And now the cost for a reinspection, it's not the cost of a whole home inspection. It could be $150 or something, but to have the home inspector come back out and reinspect. Then what happens if the appraisal comes back subject to repairs? Who pays to have the appraiser come back out to reinspect? I'm going to point it out to you guys. What happens if so what happens if there's any lender required repairs? And if these repairs or remedies, this is under the appraisal paragraph, are subject to reinspection and approval prior to the recording date, buyer shall pay for the first reinspection. And then thereafter, seller to pay for all additional reinspection fees. Do you see the costs to the buyer? So what happens if the buyer is on a limited budget? They have just enough to make sure that they can pay for, they put money up for the appraisal, and you're like, they just have X amount of money, and maybe they can put the home inspection on a credit card, or they just have enough for that, right? But they don't have enough money to advance funds for the appraisal. I've negotiated it where we have the funds for the appraisal come out of the earnest money. So there's a way to negotiate that. Okay. Oftentimes when we look at financing, we look at who's their lender? Are we familiar with the lender? Talking to other people, other licensees. Hey, do you have experience with this lender? Find out, like reach out to others. If you have no idea who the lender is, talk to other people. Do you have experience with this lender? Are they good? I mean, like, did they get the deal done? Because what you don't want is someone who's like really inexperienced and then has led and qualified a buyer, and ultimately they never checked on things early on, and then the deal falls apart because they were not familiar with the process or a particular loan product that they were not familiar with. This has happened especially for specialty programs or specialty listings, like a manufactured home. I sold a manufactured home. The lender said that this buyer could qualify, and yes, absolutely assured me that she has experience with manufactured homes, but there are certain requirements that are involved with that. And she didn't research the requirements ahead of time. We found the solution, found another lender that was super experienced, and he picked up where she left off, and we were able to get it closed. Hallelujah, let me tell you. And there weren't many appraisers who actually did manufactured homes. Now, I think things have changed since then. So anyway, we'll keep going. Seller financing, owner financing, I'll give you guys like a cheat sheet terms for that, but you can also connect with title in regards to that. Costs are all negotiable. The really big ones, there's little ones like tax registration and flood certification, lender doc prep fees, and processing fees, those can get expensive quickly. So if you're representing a seller, pick up the phone and find out from the lender how much those costs are. So if you're representing the seller, find out how much those costs are. So when you do a net proceeds sheet, you can actually see what those costs are. Super important, because I've had ones that were like $1,000. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot. And is it all on the seller side, or can it be split between buyer and seller? So truly important. And yeah, and so just checking and cleaning up your offers, other things that are negotiable, as-built survey. Sometimes you could even be a good resource if you're representing the buyer and the seller's concerned about costs, and you know of a certain vendor that actually does a great job and is reasonably priced. And here's a suggestion. I'm only using this as an example for someone who's does the majority of their business in Anchorage, and maybe they come out to the valley. And maybe they don't have a surveyor or an engineer that they typically would use. Who do you recommend? You can be that resource. You can let them know, hey, if you're looking for a good surveyor, here are a couple of names. Call them. And then also have that team of resources in your back pocket. Because I developed a great relationship with a surveyor, because I've dealt with several surveyors that their turnaround time was lengthy, but this one got it done. And I was like, oh, I need an as-built survey, and I need it like yesterday. I know that this person has built in emergency dates to allow me to slide right in. So really, really nice to have that. Moving forward, what else can we negotiate? The cost of the appraisal we can negotiate. Sometimes when you're negotiating fees and costs and you're in a multiple offer situation, what happens if the buyer takes on some of the seller costs? You can play around with some of that. If it's allowed, check with your lender. But it also making sure that the buyer understands what are their costs. So when you're writing an offer, communicate with the lender and say, hey, can you give, oh, what is it called? Oh, shoot. Let me think about this. It's like a good faith estimate. So can you give the client, I'll communicate this, hey, lender, are you able to give us a cost sheet? That's what I'll ask for. I want to see the cost sheet. Send me a copy too. It'll show what their out-of-pocket expenses are. And it'll also break down what their closing costs are. So that way you have an estimate based on that particular property, and you give them the address. Say, hey, lender, we're writing an offer on 123 Main Street. Can you please run numbers for this home? They'll pull up the tax record, apply taxes, and give you a cost summary. I think that's super important. So that way you know how to write the offer and how much closing costs to ask for. Okay, so when you're starting to work with clients, being able to know, hey, do you need help with closing costs? Do you have money set aside? Or have you talked to a lender? That's your first question. But then teaming up with the lender and being able to communicate with the lender, like, hey, do they need help with closing costs? How much do you need help with closing costs, and moving forward in that way? And then, so then this will give you kind of an idea. As-built survey can usually be negotiated. I mean, we touched on that. Well, and septic also. Title companies, sometimes you'll see where it'll be countered. Maybe the listing licensee has a favorite title company. The important part also to ask why, what's important to the seller. There was an instance where it was important to a seller to be able to close out a particular title company, but that selling licensee wrote a different title company, and that's, that deal didn't work. Maybe it's important to them because they're closing on one property. And so if you're doing like a contingent deal, like your buyer has to close on one particular property in order to buy another, try to get it with the same title company. The reason for this is, or you receive a contingent offer from a buyer and you're representing the seller, find out if title has been opened, if it's under contract, who is the title company there, and make sure you guys are aligning your efforts. So, very, very important. Aligning your efforts, because then you can do a simultaneous closing. There won't be this weird gap in waiting, because what will happen is then funds will hit the account of one title company, and then you have to wait and then have it transferred somewhere else, or it can be a mess. So if you can do it simultaneously and have it, have it together with one title company, that's beautiful. We also touched on, let's see. All right, other negotiable points. Sometimes you'll have where home inspectors will be negotiated. They'll be like, yep, you can use all these home inspectors except quality home inspection services. And maybe asking questions. Why is that important to your seller? Like, or maybe it was important to your buyer to be able to use that particular home inspector. It's fine. Like, just keep going. Add other people to the list if possible. If you're going to be adding additional additional home inspectors, if they're not on your contract, you need to add them to the contract. Super important. Everything in writing, because you're basically requesting permission from the seller to allow that home inspector into the home. And you're creating a huge liability if you don't. So if you decide, oh, well, we want this contractor to go in, make sure you add them to the contract formally in writing, not an email, in writing. Other things that can be negotiated, we touched on the appraisal. The recording date can be negotiated, and we can get creative with the recording date too, and potentially rent back. So I think this covers this for now. I'm going to pause our recording here. Stand by.